Hi, Jenny, and welcome back to Entrepreneurcast. It's great to have you back on the show with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I love recording these and I love the comments and feedback that's starting to come back from the first few that have gone out. So thank you for having me.
So, Jenny, today I would like us to talk about nonverbal influence for speaking visibility, and we touched on it a bit early in our conversation when we talked about how you whenever you're on stage, how you can influence people just by doing certain things, but without speaking. You don't actually have to communicate, verbally. You send this non-verbal signals and make people do whatever you want them to do. Jenny says jump and they jump. So
Well, quite the
so Jenny, tell us all about it. How do you influence people without verbal communication? How do you do that?
It's interesting. So let me just explain to you listening the reason that this is such a hot topic. So many of you have heard the Moravian studies that go to show that, a large percentage of what we do is all around our body language and only 7% are our words. And this is so true. Now, I'm going to be candid with you. I'm known for visibility, and one of the things that I love helping people to do is to spread their ripples far and wide. And there's been a lot of focus, especially for the entrepreneur now, on the online business, which means that those of us in business, those of us that are networking, those of us that are doing face-to-face stuff are finding it almost increasingly more difficult to find really great tips and techniques on how to influence our audience. So I want to start by saying this is a caveat. This is not about you making people do things against their will. I'm sure there's all sorts of hypnotic and embedded commands that I could probably share, but that's not my kind of thing. So I'm sharing this with you all in the spirit that you are all doing great things in the world, influencing great people with your products, your knowledge, your programs, telling them about your books, your services and things like that. So very recently, I was standing on a stage speaking to a professional body. There were around 200 people in the room. And there was this point at which somebody in the audience had difficulty understanding a point that I was making. And because they weren't an English speaker as their first language, and because culturally it's quite acceptable for them to say, hey, that doesn't make sense. Explain yourself. What does that mean? Now, it occurred to me afterwards when I thought about it that most speakers would take that as a bit of an affront. I mean, I'm the one on the stage and you're listening to me, so you should fall into line and do as I say. And that's not necessarily true. Different people have different ways in which they understand. And as a speaker, I'm just going to share with you a couple of different things that you can do without having to open your mouth. So the first thing is, when somebody asks you a question, even if it's in a public space like that, regardless of how they've asked the question, don't go on the defensive. Don't presume that they are testing your knowledge. They're trying to belittle you in some way or belittle you in front of your audience. Let's go back to basics here. Let's go back to, we are trying to help them to understand the points or the information that we're sharing. So let's start giving people the benefit of the doubt, speakers. Let's start looking at things for what they really are. I say, let's take the heat out of the emotion. So let's take the emotion out of this. The only place I went to when the person asked the question, regardless of how they asked it and who they asked it to, was they don't understand. Now, it's my job as the person on the stage to make sure that everyone understands, whether it's one person or 10 people that don't. And let's face it, this person was probably brave enough to say, I don't understand, explain better, is kind of what they said. Now, at that point, I did something and I caught myself doing it. So they asked the first question, I don't understand, explain better, was in their kind of broken English. So the first thing I did was I asked them a question. I wanted to clarify the specific bit that they wanted an explanation for. So once I understood that, I answered the question. I went through and repeated what I did. But here's what I did non-verbally. When they asked the question, I actually took quite a big step back. Now, when you're reading people's body language, it's always good to read it in the grand scheme of things. So there's a lot of things where people say somebody had their arms crossed, they were angry with me. No, they might have been cold, they might have been feeling insecure, they might have been doing a self-hug, they might have had stomachache, they might have had heartburn, they might have been nervous about what was to come afterwards, but people often read it in isolation. So one of the ways to let the whole audience know, even if it's just the one person that's asking the question, what I actually did was a non-threatening pose. As a speaker, especially standing on a stage and kind of looking over at the audience, I could have walked forward. I mean, if you could watch me on video, I'm actually demonstrating and moving closer to the camera. It actually feels quite intimidating when somebody is kind of lurching over you. So what I actually did was I stood back. Now, there were two reasons that I did that. From a non-verbal point of view, standing back is saying, I'm not a threat, it's okay, you can speak. Something else nearly went on then. The nature and the way they asked the question, quite frankly, made me feel uncomfortable for a few seconds. So if I had allowed myself to be uncomfortable with that, what I would have done was not only would I have stood back, I would have protected myself and crossed my arms in some way across my body. But thankfully, I helped so many other people to do this. I was able in that moment to help myself. So what I chose to do was to keep my body language open. Now, I want you to imagine as I speak to you that my arms are like open and outstretched to each side. This means quite literally in body language terms that if somebody was about to throw a spear or an arrow at me, I've like literally got my hands back in a surrender position saying, it's okay. I come with no weapons. I am no threat to you. I'm letting you have the most vulnerable bit of my body, you know, my stomach, my chest, my lungs, my throat, my face. This makes them or allows them to feel okay to ask the question. It's really, really important that you're able to do that with your audience. If, however, I had run the inner metric that had said, this person is questioning my credibility, my authority, not only might I have stood back away from them, I might have closed down my body language, I might have crossed my arms around my body, I might have looked down, I might have done 101 things. But in that moment, I somehow remembered and chose to stay open. It allowed me to verbally speak part of that conversation and answer that question. And it also allowed them to ask another question, which again wasn't so eloquent, but that's fine. They then said, okay, give me an example of how that would look for me. Now, I don't know anything about this person. So I gave them permission that I was going to make a presumption verbally. And I was able to say, I'm going to make this up because, but again, I used lots of open gestures. I had my hands to each side. And if you could see the video or you're watching the video of this, you'll see me doing it. But if you're on the podcast, I have my hands to each side, open, nothing crossed in my body. And at the time, I had a very strong stance. You know, my legs were not crossed in any way. I stood with my feet apart. I stood tall, I tilted my head so they could tell I was listening. I wasn't confronting them. So I stood tall, nice open body language, tilted my head to one side to listen. If you're sitting there thinking, what on earth are you talking about, tilting your head to listen? Just for a minute, imagine that a 3-year-old is coming up to you and they're desperately trying to tell you something. Now, you'd look at them to let them know you've got their attention, but what do you do with your head next? You tilt it to one side. You can't help but tilt it. You tilt it to demonstrate that you're listening, that you're caring. So that was the second thing that happened. So the next thing that I want to talk about in terms of non-verbal influence is what happens when you're the person at the front of a room. Maybe you're at a meeting, maybe you're in a workshop, maybe you're at a seminar, and you want people basically to shut up. Now, because this is about non-verbal influence, we can't now shout, everyone be quiet, shut up. Or the other thing that I hear a lot of people do at seminars, if you can hear the sound of my voice, clap once. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap two. Now, this might be my own quirky stuff. The reason that I don't like that is that you have to be a very special person to be able to get away with saying that without appearing patronising. Especially when you're speaking to a room full of adults, male, female adults, it can be a little bit kind of a childish way to address adults, and it can bring out their schoolboy and schoolgirl behaviours. So you'll either get people that simply ignore you, you'll either get people that get annoyed, you'll get people that will choose their conversation to be more important than yours and just carry on, or even leave the room so they can continue their own conversation. It's really funny, I've observed this so many times, and whilst many people are compliant, a lot of others just don't like it. So here's a little something, excuse me, that you can do. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so sorry about the cough. So here's a little something that you can do. Now, I remember being at a networking event and sitting next to the host, and we'd broken them up into exercises and everyone was chatting. You know that bit where you know that they have done the exercise and now they're talking about all sorts of different things, what's to come, what they did that day, and that kind of thing. And I remember the host saying, excuse me, everyone, excuse me. And I said to her, let me teach you a little non-verbal trick that will really help to quieten down the room. Don't ask me why it works, it just does. And with that, as everybody spoke, I spoke really slowly. I dropped the pitch of my voice. Now, that was just one part to what happened. When you speak more slowly and you drop the pitch of your voice, it's almost like people will lean in. But it's what I did non-verbally that had the whole room come to a standstill. And all I did was, rather than go into the normal trainer speaker, flailing my arms around in the air, I simply made sure that the palms of my hands were facing the floor, which is not the most natural of stances for people. The palms of my hands were facing the floor, almost as if I was about to bounce two invisible balls underneath them. And with the slowness of speech and the dip in the voice, I simply said, thank you. You can all come back into the room. I didn't wave my head around. I was very stoic, very stationary, quite static. I didn't move my arms or legs. I just had my palms facing down, lowered my voice, stopped moving my head around, almost statuesque. And it was at that point, the whole room just stopped talking and looked at me. And the only sound that could be heard was the host going, oh my gosh, how on earth did you just do that? So, one of the things that we tend to do when we're engaging people, our palms will be up, our arms will be flailing, even the tone of our voice will go up. We'll have questions. Anybody got any questions? We'll normally tend to speed up our speech. But in order to get great non-verbal attraction and attention from the audience, remain as stoic, as stationary, and as still as possible. Remember those 3 S's. So you're not moving your head around a lot. Your voice is going actually a little bit quieter, so that in order for people to hear what you have to say, they have to turn their own volume down, which means they have to stop talking. And all of a sudden they listen to you. Now, it's not the first time I've shared that technique or used it. The first time I learned it, I was co-training with a guy that used to do a lot of training for Virgin. And we were training a team of directors and sales managers who had reverted to 3-year-olds. They were throwing pencils at each other in a boardroom in quite a serious meeting. And I did the whole everybody, can we all be a little bit quiet, please? You know, my little squeaky voice. And it was him that said, no, 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 this is what you need to do. And I've used it ever since. And it really works. It really works. So that was the second point to make. So the other really useful thing to put in your toolkit, to put in your arsenal, is if you are live speaking and you really want to create credibility, authority and gravitas, is look at how you stand. A lot of people will say, look at how you speak and look at the ums, and do you say things like and all that kind of stuff. And in certain circles that might be important, but the most important piece is how you come across. You want a really good, strong stance. In order to get there quickly, imagine that you've got some like rods of steel going from your hips straight through to your legs, straight out the soles of your feet, through the floor, down into like the core of the earth, through the concrete, the tar and everything else, going into the center of the earth. You've got these complete like structures that means that nobody can push you over, push you down, or sway you in any way. Make sure that your stance is in that way. And then make sure that from the hips upwards, the rest of the body falls in line too. So there's no point having these really strong stances in a floppy top half. Make sure that from your hips upwards, that you have your chest expanded to the front of the room, that you have your shoulders not right back, but just kind of parallel with the people that you're facing. The first few times you do it, it will feel strange. You'll feel like you look funny in the way you're standing. But at many workshops and classes and things that I run, even with private clients, I get them to make this stance and then I show them. I either take a photo of them or a video of them and show them what they look like. And each and every time they're surprised. They think that they look like they're sticking their stomach out or throwing their shoulders back and that they are standing in an S shape, when in fact, very strong, very credible, and very, very positive stance. So try that out for size. Next time you have to speak to a stage of people, let me know how you get on. And if I may, look up the Queen of Being Seen on Facebook and do just type a little note in. Let me know what worked. Let me know what you noticed that was different to what you've got before. I love hearing the stories when you come back to me and let me know. So that's it for this week. Go out there, be credible, be seen, be heard, be noticed, but most of all, get visible. And now you can do it without words. How cool is that?
Brilliant. Thanks so much for this, Jenny. It's incredible. It's incredible how you can influence people without the words. So thank you for sharing that with us this week, and I really look forward to our next week's message.
Thank you. Bye for now.